You come from California. I know your older brother Wes, was a track athlete. So is that how you got into track and field?
Yeah, so I definitely have a different story than a lot of Olympic athletes. I kind of just like stumbled into track and field.
Okay.
I was at a brand new school. My brother is 2 years older than me, and he was at a different high school. And so he was running track, and he was doing really well. And for me, I really came out to the track team just because I needed to meet people, like I needed friends. So my brother, my dad, like encouraged me to go out, and I did. And I just right away, like, completely fell in love with the sport. And I also found like the most amazing group of friends. And so that was like my introduction to track. And then, like, it just took off from there. It was kind of a whirlwind.
So, okay, you didn't start track and field. You didn't start sprinting organized until you got into high school.
Yeah, I was like super busy thinking like basketball was going to be my thing, but like
Okay.
also knowing like it really wasn't. um, so that was my first love. But yeah, it was ninth grade where I really like was introduced to like track and field, and this is how it works, and blocks, and like the whole deal. So
That is so wild. I think that your progression, because we'll get into this, how you, when you went to your first Olympics, but from the time that you started to the time that you went to your first Olympics is probably the fastest of any of the athletes. And we've actually, that's funny, a lot of the athletes have had like quick or very exponential growths in their sport. But I mean,
yeah.
starting in high school is, that's just mind blowing to me. Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy for me as well, to think of like starting in ninth grade, and then just things happened very quickly. And I didn't know anything about the sport. And so I was learning very fast. But I think, track and field is interesting because it's all about time. So you can
Yeah.
always measure up your times against, the most elite. And I think that really like helped as far as like how quickly I progressed.
Did you, when you, I mean, in your first season or yeah, season, when you started running, were you initially like, oh, I'm really fast. I could be really good at this because you had those other times to look at?
Yeah, it was interesting. My coach, he was the one who was like, because when I went out for the first practice, he had like everybody run 60 meters. And so I ran it, and then he was like, he had me do it again. And then he like brought out the wheel and like measured to make sure his distance was correct. And he kept doing this. And then finally he was like, oh, like you're really fast. And like for me, it didn't click. Like I didn't know times or anything like that. I'm just like, I went out literally in my basketball shoes. I had like my Gary Paytons that I like loved, and I was like doing the workout in those. So I was completely clueless, but he was the one who was like, "You've got a lot of potential."
I can't get over that. He got off the wheel to measure to be like, oh, this can't be right. This
Yeah.
is too short. It's not 60 meters. Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. So not to rewind a little bit. So you played basketball growing up. Did you play any other sports?
My parents had me kind of like in everything. So I
Okay.
was like I did gymnastics, like yeah, I did basketball. I just kind of grew up in my neighborhood, so like street races and playing in the backyard and kind of like doing everything like rollerblading, just really being active and
Yeah.
like being in my community. So but yeah, everything like I wasn't dialed into one thing like at a young age.
Okay. So you get into track and field because you want some friends
Yep.
and you end up winning gold medals. That's pretty great. So obviously your coach saw something very early on in you. What was the transition to, how quickly did you realize, oh, I could go to an Olympics for this. Like I want to be the Allyson Felix that you are today.
Yeah, I would say it was probably like my junior year where I was like my eyes were kind of beginning to get open. I was running, great times, and was moving forward. And because before I don't even think I really understood that like you could be a runner and like that could be your job. And like I
Right?
didn't
That's
grow
so
up,
interesting.
yeah, like I didn't grow up knowing like, I knew the Olympics, but like just as a casual, like um we
You're
like
fine.
listened just as casually like watching the Olympics together,
Yeah.
it wasn't like we were hardcore like Olympic fans or anything like that. So yeah, I was just like open to this whole idea of like what could be at that time.
That's incredible. So it was really because of your athleticism and the fact that you were so good at sprinting just naturally, that's kind of what opened your eyes into, oh, I might want to do this. Did you fall in love with sprinting early on, or was it because you were good, or did you actually, you're like, oh, I enjoy the process of this? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I fell in love with it. It was like
Okay.
right away, I was like, this is my thing. I think one of the things that really stuck out for me was, there's nothing subjective about it. Like, you line up and you literally figure out like who is the best on that day. And there was something, I've always been a competitive person. I come from a competitive family. And so that like did something for me. And yeah, so that, and then like obviously I knew that I was talented, but I knew that like it was going to take more than that. And I think it was like realizing that, towards the latter years of high school, that it was like, okay, I need to like dedicate myself and kind of like bump this up if I'm going to take this to the next level.
What did that bumping up look like for you? Because for the listeners, you said you started freshman year, you end up going to the 2004 Olympics, which we're getting ahead of ourselves, but you essentially, as a junior, because 2004 would have been your freshman year of college, correct? Or like end of senior
Yeah.
year. Yeah. So that's a small window to be like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I'm gonna get, I'm gonna crack down and really focus on the Olympics. So what did that look like?
Yeah, so it was pretty much like, I was playing basketball before. I started to focus on track and field. I started to like lift in the gym, and just realizing like even small things, just like making sacrifices. Like, I wasn't doing everything else that everybody else was doing, I was just taking it more serious. And so I think those were kind of like some of the smaller sacrifices in the beginning. And I think they definitely laid the foundation, because once I went to college, I had to go to a whole different level. So that was kind of like just preparing me and getting me ready. I always go back to like the lessons that I learned in high school were just like, I don't know, they set me up for, for life, because I constantly went back to them.
Can you give me an example of like one lesson you remember from high school that you're like, oh, this is stuck with you for life?
Yeah, I think just work ethic,
Yeah.
like, even just like the structure of your day, like, being able to go to class and then go to training, and that intensity of training, like, when you step out there, like being very focused, and just dealing with that. And then dealing with like defeat, like even on that level. And then taking that, to the professional world. I just constantly like go back to those lessons that I learned like very early on.
That's awesome. And so cool that like you learned those so early on in your career, because I feel like a lot of athletes maybe don't until later. And those lessons really do shape you and create you into the
Yeah,
athlete and the person that you become. And it's better to learn them earlier
it
rather than
is.
later.
It is.
Yeah.